I use Adobe Illustrator to make my graphics and my figures, both for my bumbling biochemist stuff as well as for my scientific presentations and works. And so learning Illustrator was a really important thing that I did. I'm really glad I did it. So I started learning when I entered grad school, and then just have kind of built up skills that have come in really handy. So not everybody has access to Illustrator, and I totally recognize that. And a free alternative is Inkscape. And I'm not sure how directly compatible some of my tips are going to be, but I've used Inkscape in the past before I actually had access to Illustrator. You might be able to get access to Illustrator through your school, or that sort of thing, and they have discounted student rates. But this has been a really helpful tool for me, and so I want to help other people get started. Some of the little just tips and tricks that I've learned for doing the very basic things in Illustrator. So hope this is helpful for people. I've also made a written guide that I will put on my blog to accompany this.
Okay, so first let's just get oriented with Adobe Illustrator. So these white things, these are called artboards. So this is the little artboard icon over here. You can also get to it with Shift-O. You can draw an artboard like that, etc., etc. Your artboards, you can use them to export your files. So you can say, put the name of the file for the artboard. So if you click on that artboard up here, you can then change the name of it. You can change the name of it to something that you would want to export it as, and later we'll get into exports. But this is the basic idea of having these artboards, and typically you can use these artboards like an artboard per figure, but you don't have to do that sort of thing. And we'll also show you how you can export parts of a figure without doing the artboard tool. Let's first get comfortable with like selecting objects. So they're like objects and they're groups, and then there are anchor points and things. So if you click on V, this is going to get you to this selection tool, and this is going to like select the highest level type thing. So it's going to select entire objects, or if you have a group of objects, it's going to select the group of objects. This white arrowhead is the direct select tool. This is going to select anchor points. So this is like how you adjust specific anchor points. So you can get to that by pressing A or by pressing this white arrowhead. And now you can alter the anchor points. Another thing about this though is that if you have, say, a group of objects, and so typically an A, if you click A and you click on the right, like on a point, it'll get you the anchor point. If you click on the center of the object, well, now you're actually like selecting the whole object. And if you then select V, now you can manipulate that object, even though it's part of a group with that V tool. Okay, so that was basically that. If you select command A, you're gonna select everything. And if you want to select things that are like the same, so say the same color, the same stroke, the same, that sort of thing, you can click on something. So say I want to click on this, and then I'm going to go to object. Select. So here you have select objects, and I can do select same, and then I can do select appearance. I can do select fill and stroke, fill color, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if I say okay, I want to have something that's the same fill and stroke, well, now you can see that it's also selected the points on the line, but not the line itself, because I didn't select, those don't have the same, that's on the stroke. And so if I click a different selection tool, then I could have gotten that. And this is going to be really helpful if you want to change the colors of a line, such as you import a file, like a Prism file, and I'll show you more about doing that later. But this is just a basic way that you can select things based on their features, and you can also select object. You can select like all text objects, and this is going to be really helpful at times as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about grouping. So I mentioned how, like, if you use this select tool, you're going to get the grouped objects. So you can see that right here, I'm in a group. If I double click on a group, I go inside the group. Now you can see that I'm clicking on a path as opposed to a group. If there was a group with a lot of things, like multiple groups, so if I click on this, well, now the way I did it, it's still in a path. But if this was, say, a group, so how you can group things is if you click on them, you can also drag to click, or you can click them individually. If you do command+G, now these are grouped. So now if I were to click on this whole group, I'd be in a group. If I were to click on this, I'd be in another group. And if I were to click again, now into the type. If I were to use the A, I could get to this type directly. Okay, and you can ungroup the objects. So say I wanted to ungroup that group I just made by command+Shift+G. Okay, so that's the basics of selecting and grouping objects. Now let's talk a little bit about reformatting. So say you want to change the size of, something. If I wanted to, say, change the size of this graph, if I just click on one of these, I can easily just like drag however I want, but I'm guessing that you don't want your things to be like that. So instead, if you click and hold Shift while you are dragging, you'll preserve the aspect ratio. You can also use Shift. This Shift is going to be very useful in a variety of contexts that I will get into, such as like choosing, if you do Shift and then you rotate, so you rotate by going to the corners, you can then rotate to click selected angles, or if you drag, now you're dragging along specific lines, so you can drag vertically instead of horizontally, or horizontally instead of vertically, and that sort of thing, so you're not altering things. And notice that I'm doing command+Z a lot to undo, and command+Shift+Z will redo something. If there are specific dimensions you want something at, you can go to this transform tool, and we'll get more into this later. But here you see I have it set to constrain width and height proportion. So if I change something here, it'll keep the aspect ratio. If I turn this off, then it won't. But this can be really helpful to set the size to a specific size, as well as you could change the location for alignment type things we'll get into. You can also change the rotation, the angles. Okay, so that was the shift. So shift, another place for the shift is if you want to change how you're moving it. So you can use the arrow keys to move things. And so if I click the right arrow, I'm moving really slowly. If I click Shift, hold Shift when I click the right arrow, now I'm moving by bigger increments, and you can set these increments in the settings. If when you're using Shift with other things, such as say you're changing the text size, we'll get into text later, but when you're changing the text size, if you hold down Shift, you're going to move by bigger increments. Okay, so what if I wanted to scale these? When I scale the objects, if you hold the Shift and you go from if you hold the Shift, now you're going to be moving, keeping those dimensions constant. But you can see that I'm kind of like not moving in the center, I'm moving from like this corner. If you want to expand from the center, what you can do is you can hold down Option. So Option Shift, and now you're going to be scaling like direct with keeping your origin where you want it, or not your origin, your the center where you want it, or if that's where you want it. So that could be a really helpful thing as well. Okay, what else did I want to say? Okay, so if you say you want to mimic something, so maybe I want to make this purple, I want to make it green. What I can do is if I click on this, so I click on my object, and remember this was inside of something, so I did the A for the direct select, and I'm going to B to select this object. Now I want to make it like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press the I tool. I can also get to it by putting the eyedropper here. Now this is going to allow me to change this to match this. It'll also do like stroke and copy the stroke and various things like that. And you can change the settings in the settings for options. Okay, so going back to like scaling, if I were to click select two things and then turn them. They're going to turn together. But if I go to Object, Transform, Transform Each, now I can get them to each turn individually of one another. And this can be really helpful. And the same goes for like scaling. This is really helpful if you want to change the width of your bars in a bar graph, say. Okay, another helpful thing. So I have it set to preview. You can also take off preview, but I like to see the preview. Another thing is you can be setting the location for the reference where you want things to move around. So here they're going from the center, but I could also change to do it from one of the like corners or that sort of thing. If you press OK, it's just going to keep it. If you press copy, you're going to get a copy of it. And so your original will be preserved. And this can be really helpful as well. You can also do things like reflect X, reflect Y, random, various things like that. What you see is I have selected the scale, strokes, and effects. This is going to be a key thing. And this, you can do this in your general settings for more. Preferences. You go to your general preferences. I have it set to scale, strokes, and effects. This is going to be really helpful because what it does is when you like scale up or down, it's going to scale up or down the thickness of a line, say. If you don't have that on, well, now your line, if it stays the same thickness, but everything's getting smaller, then your line is going to be like overwhelming your other stuff, which is not good. So that's really important to make sure you have selected if that's what you want. Okay, let's talk about arranging objects. So if you go to this figure, you can see that I have this line in front of this line. And if I wanted to put this line behind that line, then when I have this arrow in front of this line, in front of this line, I can change this by using the parentheses, what's the box parentheses, whatever the symbol is. The left one is going to send objects backwards and the right one is going to send objects forwards. So command plus left to go backwards, command plus right to go forwards. If you want to go all the way backwards or forwards, then you can hold down the command plus shift plus that symbol to go backwards. So let me explain. So right now my arrow is in front. If I go command back, now it's behind this line, but it's in front of, or it's hard to see. I go command back. That's probably because there's a lot of objects. So let's take a close look. Okay, so if I go command back, it's going to depend on like how many objects there are. And you can see this in the layers. But right now you're behind this line, but in front of this line and in front of this line. I can go now and behind this line and this line, but not this line. And I go far enough, I'll go all the way back. An easier way to go all the way back is to do command shift back, and that'll take me all the way back. If you have a lot of objects, it can be hard to like find which, like how many layers back you are and that sort of thing. What you can do is you can actually, the easiest thing is often to group them together if that's not going to mess anything up. Now you have fewer objects in your group, and then you can more easily manipulate things. But beware that if they're in different groups, then that's not going to work. Or that could like mess up other things. If you are trying and you can't get, even if you press command all the way back, it's not going all the way back. It might have something to do with them being in different groups or layers. So you can try grouping, then ungrouping, and trying aligning that again. Speaking of layers, so this is like the layers tool, and you can see all of the objects that are ahead or above of something, and then you can move them in here as well. And there are a lot of things that you can do with layers that I'm not going to get into, but that's the basics of like arranging objects in front of or behind one another. Okay, what about like aligning objects? So if you press so I already have this align window open. You can get to these various windows by going to window, and then you see all these options, and you see this is the align window, which I could also get by going to pressing shift F7. And then sometimes things will show up in the top toolbar. These are the icons for your align. And here is where you set what you want to be your point of reference. So when we talk about aligning, we can align different things and we can also distribute different things. So aligning is basically like lining up. So either lining them up by their sides, by their centers, horizontally or vertically. Distributing objects is going to make the spacing even. So either like the vertical distribution, so based on like where these points are. If I wanted to say, select these, if I were to align them, now they're all on top of each other. If I were to change this distribution, and now I wanted to distribute them. If I distribute them by I can distribute them by their size or by like distribute their spacing. And right here, they're the same thing because these are the same size. But if they were different, then it could be different if you're evenly spacing out the distances. Okay, so those were aligning these objects to one another. What if I want to say, what if I have one of these points? It's like all the way up here. If I align them to the bottom, they're all going to go to, by default, to the one with the lowest bottom. If I were to align them to the top, they're going to, by default, go to the one at the top. So what if I want to align to like the specific one of them? What I can do is I can select them all, and then I select this one. You're going to see this now. This is going to get this bolder outline. This is telling you that it's now your key reference. And so you can see here, it's showing align to key object. And now what you can do is if I were to say align to that, it's going to align to that, whether it's top or bottom, et cetera, et cetera. And then I can undo all of this. Okay, so those were aligning to the selection. So here you're in this selection. If I were to align multiple things together, here they're in the selection. If I were to click on one of them, now I'm aligning to the key object. What if I want to align to the artboard? So say put all these in the bottom of the artboard. Well, now if you just have one thing clicked, by default it's aligned to artboard, or you can also, if you have multiple things, you can click align to artboard. And now you can align them to your artboard. This could be helpful if you want to center things, etc. You can also like figure out how big an item is and where it's positioned by pressing transform. This is going to give you information about the X and Y positions, as well as the width and the height and the angles. If I say wanted to copy, so say I wanted this to make sure I wanted to make this the same height as this, I could come over here, see transform, copy the height of this one. And now I could transform this one in order to match, but in this case, they were already the same. So let's make it a little more interesting. We'll change this up. And now this one's going to shrink to be the same size. If I wanted to make, and you can also align them this way and stuff too, which is helpful if you're trying to align something that's within a group. Okay. Let me just undo all of that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about working with lines and shapes. So right now, this is selected this fill, and here you're selecting the stroke. So when you're trying to change a color, make sure that you have the correct box linked, so you're not trying to change a stroke color when you're on the fill and vice versa. And you can press this little arrow if you want to swap the fill and the lining. Okay, if you say you try drawing a line. So first let's talk about like ways that you can draw a line. First, I'm just gonna make a new artboard so I have a little bit of space to draw on. If you go to P or you press this tool, you're gonna get this like pen tool. This is gonna allow you to draw a line with anchor points. So if you just click, you're gonna get a straight line, straight point, and if you click and drag, you're going to get an anchor point. See, right now I'm in the stroke mode or the fill mode instead of the stroke mode, but now you can see this better. Okay, and then you can like escape to get out of the line. And then, so if I wanted to then play around with this line, say, if I select the line point, so this one it is a static-y one. If you press, so this thing is going to make it rounded and it's going to give you 2 points. If you want, you can just make this like a normal smooth point by pressing this convert button. And now you can change this. This is going to help you smooth out your lines. So you can also like simplify the lines. If you go to Object, Path, Simplify. Now you can change the number of points, etc., to simplify your lines and make them less jaggedy. Another way to make smooth lines that I like is to use this pencil tool. This is going to allow you to make smooth lines, and then sometimes you might want to simplify the line. If you have, oh, and also another thing about the pencil tool is it's like, doesn't draw like an actual line, like, oh, or I guess now it is, but sometimes it doesn't draw an actual line. You might need to actually turn the path on or the color of the path if you're drawing, but you don't have the stroke color on. Another thing is if you draw a line. So say I draw a line and it's kind of all over the place. This can sometimes happen too if you're trying to trace a figure, which is not something I'm going to get into here. But if you go to the smooth tool, you can kind of smooth things out, and it's going to help you. This one's a very good example, but you can. There you go. So you can see it's going to kind of smooth out your lines. Okay, so that was that. You can also, in the stroke window, so again, you can find the different windows by going up to here, and you can also, sometimes it'll show up in the top toolbar. So you can change the width. And so again, here, if I press Shift, I'll go by bigger amount. So here, the shift is changing by 10. You can also change some of the, select from a preset or type in your own. And here it's in pixels, but you can also change it to be in centimeters or points or various things. You can also change the capping as well as the corners and things like that. You can add arrowheads. The thing about arrowheads is sometimes if you add an arrowhead and then you scale your line, the arrowhead might get like huge, even though you just wanted your line to be thicker. What you can then do is you can scale down the size of the arrowhead, depending on what you want. And you can also, if you say you have the arrow on the wrong end, you can switch them this way. You can also align whether you want the top of the end of the arrow to be at the end of where you draw the line, or to be extending beyond where you draw the line. You can dash a line, change the dashing and the gapping to get what you want. If you have a dash line, you can also, if you then use like, depending on your capping, now it's hard to see because these are too big. So I can change the spacing to get that, you see that, but now you have the rounded. And so this can be good if you want to like make a dotted line and things like that. There are also preset, brushes and various things like that. And you can find different decorative brushes in here, which I'm not going to go into here, but there are a bunch of different brushes and strokes that you can choose from, and you can also make custom ones. If you want to change if you want to change the width of a line in specific points, you can go to this width tool. Now you can click on a particular point and you can change the width at that point. You can also slide this to move this. There are various cool things you can do, and you can make really complex shapes in this way. If you want to make a shape in that way, you can also go to Object Expand Appearance, and now you see this is an object. And now you can also see there's a lot of points, so if I wanted to go to Object, Path, Simplify. Now I can remove anchor points, so I don't have as many anchor points. This is going to make your life a lot easier and make things smoother when you try to change things. Okay, so that's basically those things. Okay, let's get into some text. So to get into the text mode, you can press Command T, or oh, sorry, just T. Okay, so to get into the text mode, you just press T, and now I'm in this text mode. There are a couple of kinds of text modes. Also, another thing is you can do command minimize in order to zoom out. Okay, so I'm in this text mode now, and I am seeing this text, and right now, what I'm in is I have this white box here. This means that if I scale this, it's going to scale with the box. And so this means that if I make the box bigger and accidentally like squish it, I can be squishing the text, and that you can actually see if you squish the text. If you go to character, I have this docked out. There's my window. If you go to window, type, character. Okay, I like to keep this out usually, but you can see that the text, this dimension is all skewed. So I can change that, and now it's like that. So the basic key thing is that my text is scaling with the box. So you need to do shift if you want to change the box size without changing the text. If I go and it's not gonna the text won't change. If I go and I click this, now I'm in this area type tool. Now what's going to happen is I can change the size of the box without altering the text itself. And so, for example, if I do this, then it's going to wrap with the box. Right now it's in hyphenate, so if I did something, it might do something weird. I don't know when it decides to hyphenate or not, but I typically turn hyphenate off because I don't like my words being all cut off. Speaking of words, so right now you can see this red squiggly lines because I have the spell check on. You can go to get to spell check, you go to edit and spelling, and here I have it on auto spell check, but beware if you're making scientific figures that it doesn't really know science language very well. Okay, and yeah, so you can switch back and forth between the text modes in this way, but know that if you change to this way, and then you have, so say I was in area type and I had my lines like this. And now I convert this to this type of type. Now what's going to happen is if I were to then change back to area type, it's not going to automatically think these are part of the same line. So it's not going to unwrap the text. So you'll have to do that manually. Okay, let's talk about working with imported, linked, or embedded figures. So you can embed files if you don't want to be able to change the identity of the underlying file. So here I have an image. I might want to not embed this image. I can link this image. So right now I have it as a linked file. This means that I can change this figure. This can be helpful. So say if you want to use the same size, the same basic outline, but for a different gel, or if you have a file structure, and then you want to be able to make alterations in the PDB file and that sort of thing, and be able to keep it linked. If you don't change the file name, it'll then if you update the underlying file, it'll update this figure, and you can also then change the linked figure. But what happens is that if you do that, you want to make sure that when you save, oh, sorry, well, I can't do it now because I already have the setting set. But when you have it as save, you want to make sure that you click to include the linked file, or else if you go to open it later and you don't have that file, or you send it to someone and they don't have that file, then it's not going to show up. But sometimes you want to embed the underlying file. And that's another reason why you might have to embed the underlying file is if you have a situation like that, instead of having it linked to actually have it embedded, then you don't have to worry about it getting lost or the file changing and that sort of thing. You also need to embed the file if you actually want to directly edit it in Illustrator. So a common place this comes up is if you're putting in a bar graph or something like that, and you want to be able to change the colors. So for example, if you're using GraphPad Prism, what I typically do is I export it as a PDF. Now what I can do is I can actually just drag that PDF into here. So right now it says a linked file, so I can't like come in and edit it. If I want to be able to edit it, I'm going to have to embed it. So I want to embed this file. And now you can see that it's right now it has like a bunch of clipping masks on it. We'll get more into clipping masks in a minute, but for now, just need to know that it's going to make it so that I can't actually be editing these things very easily. And it's going to be a lot of weird lines that I don't want, invisible lines, formatting stuff. So what you can do is you can actually go to Object, Clipping Mask, Release, or you can get to it directly by Option Command+7. So sometimes there's like a bunch of clipping masks. So I typically just like press it a bunch of times until now you see that these are all individual points. Now what I do is I select everything. I go to Object, Path, Clean Up, and it's going to clean up any of those invisible lines, which can be really helpful. Okay, so now I can select the things individually and I can manipulate them, not manipulate the data, of course, but change the colors and the formatting and that sort of thing, which can be a lot easier to do here than say in Prism. If you want to be aligning and changing the type and all of these various things, you can have a lot more control in Illustrator. And you can also change the colors to match whatever you want your formatting to be. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about these clipping masks. So right now you can see that this figure, it's like cropped, but it's not actually cropped. Instead it's masked. So the whole figure is still here. If you were to crop image, then you would actually be cutting the image and you couldn't change this. This is instead a mask. And so you can make a clipping mask on a figure or just on a shape. So if you have some sort of shape or you have some sort of figure, say. Now, if I draw a mask of the size that I want, so if I were to say draw a square, just for ease of reference, or I'm gonna make this a black square. Okay, if I wanted to say crop, or not crop, but mask the back thing, I could select these and do to Object, Clipping Mask, Make, and now I've clipped that, I've masked that. So that can be really helpful because I'm not changing the underlying figure, and then you can change the mask or the figure. Just make sure you know which one you're working with. Okay, so we talked about how you could get, this is the Artboard tool. We talked a little bit about naming, so let's talk about why you might want to name them that way. And so that comes back out to exporting it. So because Adobe Illustrator is a vector system, it means that's kind of like telling the computer like where to put various points to draw the image itself, rather than actually just like having the image like pixel by pixel. So this means that you can then export this file in like any format and blow it up to, or any like blown up size, but without pixelation, except for any embedded files, which are going to get pixelated when you blow them up, because they're limited to the original resolution of that figure that you had in there. Okay, so you can go to File, Export, Export for Screens, and this is going to allow you to export. You can select which artboards you want to export, and then you can add like scale. So if you have a PDF, the scale isn't relevant. It'll just be, because it's a vector, that's a vector format too. But so say if you had a PNG, you can change the scale and that sort of thing. Also, if you go, so if you're in a PNG or a PDF, you have the options for having a clear background or a white background. So right now my background's transparent, but I can also change it to white, or I could change it to black. So you can do what you want based on what you want. If you want to export just like a part of a figure, so instead of exporting this, another thing. So if you want to change the artboard size to match your art, you can say I want to make the artboard the size of this art. I can go to Object, Artboards, Fit to Selected Art. If you do the Fit to Artboard bound, it's going to be like everything. But if you do selected art, it's going to be what you want here. And then I can export it this way. But what if I just want to export this part of it? You can use the asset export, which is this tool over here. Press the asset export. And drag it over here, and then you can name it whatever you want and export it this way. Note that if you make changes to this figure now, though, it's going to be linked to this. But if you add things that are outside of the initial group and that sort of thing, those aren't going to show up. And so be careful when you're making changes and then using the same asset export tool. Okay, what if, so right now these objects are grouped, but what if they weren't grouped? So what if these weren't grouped, I selected them all, and then I dragged them? Well, now I'm going to get a ton of different assets. But I could also do, instead of, so I could either group it first and then drag them, or you can press Option when you drag. This is going to drag them together as a group, and then you can export them all together instead of as individual objects. And note that I just accidentally deleted that whole thing because I had this clicked. Well, this was clicked, so that all deleted. But if you just want to delete the asset, then make sure that nothing else is clicked and you're just clicking the asset, and you can delete it that way. Okay, just some other quick tips before I stop. So Command Z to undo, Command Shift Z to redo, Command plus to zoom in, and Command minus to zoom out. You can press Command Y if you just want to see the outlines. This can be really helpful if you have like hidden lines that you can't see, or you're trying to align things and there's multiple layers and things. In Command H is going to hide or show the outlines. So if you're looking at something, and so say if you're looking at this and then you press like Command H, you're not going to see those points anymore and you might get really confused. But press Command H again and you'll get back to the normal mode. Okay. Then, okay, so Command C, I've been using it a lot. It's Command C and Command V, copy and paste. I've been using them a lot, but haven't really been mentioning it, but you can so copy and paste. If you want to copy and paste in place, which is super duper helpful, you can paste in place by using the Command F. And so now I've pasted this in place. I can then like shift and drag if I want to do something like this and get something in line with that, but in the same place. So Command F is a really, really helpful thing. Another thing just quickly about colors. So right now this is on RGB. I like to often go to HSB, so hue, saturation, brightness. This can be really good for getting like something that's lighter without having to, I used to do a lot of like changing the transparency to make things lighter, but then that could mess up, make your file more complicated and mess up when it's exporting. It can get all weird with having a transparency if you don't flatten it first. You can also go to this color guide down here and find lighter shades of this particular color. And you can do different things, shades, tints, there's all these different options, as well as various settings and libraries and things that you can explore, which I haven't done too much of, but you can look at different color groups and themes and various things. Okay, so there's like so much more that I can't get into. I just don't have time. Opacity up here or over here, you can change the opacity or make gradients and various things like that. Okay, so there's a lot of different stuff and I can't get into all of it here. But oh yeah, so this one's transparency, this one's gradient. So there's a lot of different stuff and I can't get into all of it here, but hopefully that helped you get started and making some figures and using Adobe Illustrator. And yeah, so hope that helped.